Is David Kampf about to become the most expensive healthy scratch in Maple Leafs history? That's the uncomfortable reality Toronto management might be facing as training camp approaches, and it perfectly encapsulates everything that's gone wrong. With their roster construction over the past few years, let's not sugarcoat this situation. Having a $9.6 million forward, potentially heading to waivers, is an organizational nightmare that speaks to deeper issues within the Maple Leafs front office. This isn't just about one player underperforming. It's about a systematic failure to properly evaluate talent, contracts, and team needs. David Kampf was once viewed as a reliable bottom-six center, the kind of steady, defensively responsible player that championship teams need. But somewhere along the way, his value proposition completely collapsed. The inconsistency that plagued his game last season wasn't just disappointing, it was roster crippling for a team already struggling. With depth and salary cap management, the writing was on the wall when Toronto acquired Scott Lawton at the trade deadline. That move essentially announced to the hockey world that Kampf had fallen out of favor, that management no longer viewed him as a crucial piece of their playoff puzzle. When you're actively shopping a player during the season, it sends a clear message about their future with the organization. What makes this situation particularly painful is the financial reality Toronto faces. Even if Kampf clears waivers and gets sent to the AL, the Leafs can only bury $775,000 of his contract. That means they'll still be carrying nearly $3 million in dead money for a player who isn't even contributing at the NHL level. In a salary cap era where every dollar matters, it's organizational malpractice. Think about what $3 million could buy on the free agent market. That's legitimate depth scoring, defensive reliability, or special teams expertise. Exactly the kinds of players Toronto desperately needs, but can't afford because they're paying Kampf to potentially play in the minors. It's the kind of self-inflicted wound that championship contenders simply cannot afford. The broader implications are even more troubling. This situation exposes Toronto's fundamental inability to properly assess their own players and make decisive moves when necessary. They've known for months that Kampf wasn't working in their system, yet they couldn't find a trading partner willing to take on his contract. That's either poor asset management or an indication that the rest of the NHL views Kampf as significantly less valuable than Toronto originally thought. Brad Treliving and the front office are now stuck in an impossible position. Keep Kampf as an expensive press box fixture. That's terrible roster management and sends a horrible message about accountability. Waive him and eat the majority of his contract. That's admitting a massive mistake while hamstring future flexibility. Try to wait for the perfect trade opportunity. That's gambling with roster spots and team chemistry while other teams know you're desperate. The comparison to Detroit's situation with Vladimir Tarasenko is particularly telling. No team wants to be in a position where they're paying premium money for a player who doesn't fit their system. But sometimes organizational pride prevents making the necessary tough decisions. Toronto might be heading down that same path of expensive stubbornness. What's most frustrating for Leafs fans is how predictable this situation was. Kampf's decline wasn't sudden or unexpected. The signs were there throughout last season. His offensive production disappeared, his face-off winning percentage dropped, and his defensive reliability became inconsistent. Yet management either didn't see it coming or chose to ignore the warning signs. The salary cap implications extend far beyond just this season. Toronto is already operating with minimal flexibility and having nearly $3 million tied up in a player who might not even be in the lineup creates a domino effect throughout their roster construction. Every decision becomes more difficult when you're essentially playing with house money. It's already been committed elsewhere. From a pure hockey standpoint, waiving Kampf might actually be the best option available. It opens up a roster spot for a younger, hungrier player who might bring more energy and production at a fraction of the cost. Sometimes addition by subtraction is exactly what a team needs. Even if it's financially painful in the short term, the timing couldn't be worse either. Training camp is when teams are supposed to be building chemistry and finalizing their identity. For the upcoming season, instead Toronto will be dealing with the distraction of a high-priced veteran who doesn't fit their plans, creating uncertainty and potential locker room tension just as they should be focusing on hockey. There's also the psychological impact on other players to consider. When teammates see a veteran getting paid millions to sit in the press box or play in the minors, creates questions about the organization's commitment to winning and their ability to make smart personnel decisions. That kind of doubt can be toxic in a competitive environment. The hope that injuries around the league might create trade opportunities feels more like wishful thinking than realistic planning. Other general managers aren't stupid. They know Toronto is desperate to move Kampf. which immediately reduces any potential return. Desperation rarely leads to favorable trade terms. Looking ahead, this situation perfectly illustrates why Toronto continues to struggle with sustainable success. They make short-term decisions without considering long-term implications. They overvalue their own assets, and they seem incapable of cutting losses when necessary. These are the kinds of organizational habits that prevent good teams from becoming great teams. The David Kampf situation is more than just a roster problem. It's a symptom of deeper issues within the Maple Leafs organization. Until they learn to make difficult decisions quickly and efficiently, they'll continue finding themselves in these uncomfortable situations that hamstring their competitiveness. What do you think Toronto should do with Kampf? Is it better to eat the money and move on, or try to wait for a miracle trade? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're as frustrated as I am with Toronto's roster management, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more honest takes on the Leafs front office decisions. Should the Toronto Maple Leafs really be considering trading their longest tenured player and defensive cornerstone? That's the explosive question gaining momentum as Morgan Rielly's inconsistent performances continue to frustrate fans and potentially handicap a team desperate for playoff success. But the three potential trade scenarios emerging might just be the franchise-altering moves this organization desperately needs. Let's address the elephant in the room immediately. Trading Morgan really would represent one of the most significant roster shakeups in recent Maple Leafs history. This isn't some fringe player we're discussing. This is their #1 defenseman, their power play quarterback, and the longest-serving member of their current core. Yet increasingly, that's exactly why this conversation needs to happen. The harsh reality is that Rielly hasn't been the same player who put up 72 points in 2018-19, or even the 68-point performer from 2021 to 22 at 31 years old. He's caught in that dangerous middle ground where he's no longer improving, but hasn't yet reached the cliff that ends careers. His inconsistency has become maddening. One night he looks like an elite two-way defender. The next he's invisible or actively hurting the team's chances. The first potential trade scenario involves a homecoming that would send shockwaves through Leafs Nation, bringing Nazem Kadri back to Toronto. This isn't just nostalgia talking, it's smart hockey sense. Kadri has proven himself as a legitimate top-6 center since leaving Toronto, culminating in a Stanley Cup championship with Colorado and continued production with Calgary. His 67 points last season, including 35 goals, shows he's maintained his scoring touch well into his 30s. From a roster construction standpoint, this trade makes tremendous sense. Toronto desperately needs center depth behind Austin Matthews, and John Tavares and Kadri could immediately slot into that second-line role or push Tavares to wing. The financial aspects work beautifully. Rielly's $7.5 million versus Kadri's $7 million, and both players benefit from fresh starts with their respective new teams. The emotional component cannot be ignored either. Kadri left Toronto under contentious circumstances, but he's proven his critics wrong with his post-trade success. Bringing him back would represent both an organizational admission that they made a mistake years ago and a bold statement about prioritizing winning over ego. Sometimes the best trades involve admitting past errors and correcting course. The second scenario involves swapping defensive styles entirely by acquiring Edmonton's Darnell Nurse. This would represent a philosophical shift from offensive-minded defense to a more traditional, physical approach. While Rielly brings puck-moving skills and power play production, Nurse offers intimidation, shot blocking, and the kind of playoff-tested toughness that Toronto has consistently lacked. Nurse's $9.25 million salary creates complications, likely requiring Edmonton to retain some money, but the hockey fit is intriguing. Toronto has already added defensive specialists like Chris Tanev and Oliver Ekman-Larsson. Adding Nurse would create one of the most formidable defensive cores in the league. Sometimes championship teams need to prioritize defense over offense, especially in playoff hockey where games are often decided by defensive mistakes rather than offensive brilliance. The psychological impact of adding Nurse shouldn't be underestimated either. He's reached the Stanley Cup final with Edmonton, experiencing the pressure and intensity that Toronto has been unable to handle in recent playoff runs. That experience could prove invaluable for a team that has repeatedly crumbled under postseason pressure. The third and most audacious option involves pursuing Erik Karlsson from Pittsburgh. This would be the ultimate high-risk, high-reward gamble, trading for a player who won his third Norris Trophy just 2 seasons ago, but is now 35 years old and coming off disappointing campaigns with the Penguins. Karlsson's 101-point season in 2022-23 proves he still possesses elite offensive ability when properly utilized. The question is whether Toronto's system and supporting cast could help him rediscover that form. His $11.5 million salary would require additional pieces, including Nick Robertson, but the potential payoff is enormous. If Karlsson could return to even 80% of his Norris Trophy form, Toronto would instantly have the best offensive defenseman in franchise history. The risk is obvious. Karlsson could continue declining, leaving Toronto with an expensive aging defenseman who no longer provides the offensive impact that justifies his salary. But sometimes championship windows require bold moves. And Toronto's window with their current core is rapidly closing. Each of these trades addresses different organizational needs and philosophies. The Kadri trade fixes center depth while maintaining offensive production. The Nurse deal prioritizes defensive reliability and playoff experience. The Karlsson gamble swings for the fences, betting that elite offensive talent can overcome age-related decline. What makes this entire discussion particularly fascinating is Rielly's no-trade clause, which gives him significant control over his destination. Any of these moves would require his cooperation, meaning Toronto would need to present compelling cases for why these changes benefit everyone involved. The broader question facing Toronto management is whether they're willing to make the kind of franchise-altering moves that championship teams often require. Trading Rielly would signal that no player is untouchable, that winning takes precedence over loyalty and comfort. It would be a statement move that shows they're serious about maximizing their current championship window. The timing feels right for exploring these options. Rielly's trade value remains high enough to bring back significant assets, but his declining performance suggests that value might not last much longer. Toronto has spent years making incremental moves around the edges. Maybe it's time for a bold stroke that fundamentally changes their roster construction. The salary cap implications of each trade would ripple throughout Toronto's roster, potentially creating opportunities to address other needs or forcing difficult decisions elsewhere. But championship teams find ways to make the money work when the right hockey trades present themselves. From a pure asset management perspective, trading Rielly while his value remains strong makes more sense than waiting for further decline, and potentially losing him for nothing or being forced to accept a lesser return. Professional sports are ultimately about timing, and Toronto's timing with their current core demands aggressive action. Which of these three scenarios appeals to you most? Do you think Toronto should be bold enough to trade their longest-serving player, or is Rielly too valuable to move? Share your thoughts in the comments and let me know if you'd pull the trigger on any of these blockbuster deals, if you want. More analysis of potential franchise-changing moves? Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for all our Maple Leafs coverage.